The mind of an average player of Pokemon Unite. Those players who show up in our games that make us wonder if there can actually be a real human on the other side of that screen. Or if this is just a test by the gods above to see if we will go insane. Hello everyone, my name is Husky and I am a Pokemon Unite streamer and content creator and caster, and I often make educational commentary content like this here on YouTube. So if you're interested, feel free to subscribe for more future videos, and no, that's all I had. Today, I'm exploring the depths of the human mind so that you don't have to. A look into how and why the Pokemon Unite player base is so horrible at this game. We're going to do this by going through the early, mid, and late games and discuss behaviors that are common at each of these stages and why that might be. We're also going to talk about why these behaviors are incorrect and why it tends to frustrate us so much. Disclaimer, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days. We all make a wrong decision in a match, and we all observe other people's gameplay and point out things they did wrong, and they point out similar things about us. We're not making perfect gameplay decisions, and all of your losses have one common factor: you. That being said, I'm going to pretend that I'm absolutely perfect and know everything about this game and everything in the entire world for the sake of this video. What you're going to be seeing above me as I yap is a game from my new Twitch series, Husky for Hire, where I cast ranked solo queue games in the community, and I think it showcases a lot of what I'll talk about in terms of wrapping our heads around specific things players in this game seem to do. Can you spot any of these things? Let me know in the comments. It's worth first talking about the decisions made before a match of Unite even begins, the character selection process. I dove into this topic in depth in a previous video where I talked about one-tricks in the game, which also applies here. There's absolutely no incentive for players to play anything besides the singular Pokemon they want to play, so they will simply do so, regardless of the team's composition. Now, Pokemon Unite's matchmaking system works in mysterious ways, but one of the things they try to do is they try to balance the game by making sure the matchmaking rating of all the players on each team adds up to be relatively the same. So there may be a world in which there is one very highly ranked player and 4 very low ranked players matched against 5 medium ranked players. In this case, the high-ranked player is basically expected to determine the outcome of the game for the 4 low-ranked players, meaning the high-ranked player should be playing something to carry the low-ranked players. Whereas on the opposite team, the players are evenly matched and it doesn't necessarily matter who plays what. Why is this a problem? Well, we have no idea who we're matched with during the character select screen. We only know if we are ranked higher or lower than them, or if there's a duo or a trio on our team. So if your last ranked player on the team with 200 games locks in Dragapult doesn't call a lane and is playing Choice Specs, this really happened to me, there's nothing really you can do about that. The game expects that this lowest ranked player would let you, the highest ranked player, select the carry, and the lowest ranked player should be playing to support you, but that's unrealistic and often forces higher ranked players into roles that trust that low ranked Dragapult to do something. And of course, they don't. There are a few things that I mentioned in this tangent that are also important to emphasize. First, character select. The game has a built-in feature where they tell you, add a defender for team synergy, but it doesn't really do anything. So it doesn't matter at all if your team selects 5 attackers. Second, I held up one thing. Second, path selection. Players are expected to determine where they are headed at the start of a match by selecting top, center, or bottom. The game does have a feature that's a little more helpful, maybe, where if too many people are headed to one path, it says path crowded on the map selection screen, but it doesn't happen until there are like 4 people calling one path. Third, item selection. Players can observe example sets of held items for their Pokemon of choice, but these are often not optimal and don't even follow their own meta. Also, though the items have descriptions that state if they are attack-based or special attack-based, there's literally nothing stopping a player from putting those choice specs on Dragapult. It says it gives more damage. How would they know? Clearly, since we all know the feeling of having jungle double called and your team consisting of 5 attackers and looking at choice specs on Dragapult, the game itself is not doing enough for the player base to understand the preparation of what is supposed to happen in the game. This isn't what this video is about, but I have some suggestions. My first is provide an incentive for a good team comp. If you select a 5 EV comp, you get a few bonuses in the match and some cute little cosmetics. Do the same thing for a good comp, or maybe more battle points at the end of the match if you select something the team needs. Another suggestion I have is add 2 slots in the map where players fill them in when they call lane. So have 2 empty slots in top, 1 in jungle, and when those slots are full, add the path crowded message earlier. And my third suggestion is add screens that discourage players from using blatantly incorrect items. If you go to put choice specs on Dragapult, give the player a message that warns them that it won't do anything. For the rest of this video, I'm going to go through the important events that occur in a game of Unite. So, as a game of Pokemon Unite begins, we have an expectation that 2 players will head to the top path, 2 players will head to the bottom path, and 1 player will head to the central area. That should be easy, but already we've hit a roadblock when we think about the mindset of the player base. Jungle invading. Now, there are 2 types of jungle invading that I refer to here. The first is level 1 invading the enemy jungle. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad play, but it's a little annoying outside of competitive play to have to deal with. Basically sacrificing one of your early lanes. However, what I'm mainly referring to here is invading your own jungle. It often leads to multiple players fighting over the same farm, leaving one or more or all lanes to get steamrolled. This is literally never a good play unless there's been an agreement to split the jungle farm. For example, if you have 2 EVs or 2 Pokemon that evolve at level 4. The laning phase can be interesting. Players running it down for stacks, your lane Froakie not understanding how EXP share works, players not saving their last hits for farm. It's anyone's guess for how your teammates will behave. Next up is the jungle gank, which means the junglers of both teams decide which lane to rotate to. And the goal of this is to win your path and gain control over it by cleaning as much farm. I said cleaning? Clearing as much farm as possible and picking up KOs. This is also where the 850 birds will spawn. There are a few things that happen here that make us question what is up with our teammates. So first, the jungler doesn't gank. Sometimes your jungler just doesn't end up in a lane at all. For whatever reason, they want to wander around mid or try to invade the other jungle, or they take too long on their clear and just decide to wait for the next one. More commonly, if you're the jungler, your team gets angry if you don't go to their lane, so you head top because the Magikarp is there, and it's a rule of thumb to gank the Magikarp lane, but your bottom path ends up getting ganked or rolled over, leading to your team pinging you. Check it out, thanks, watch out. They're throwing the whole mixtape at you. There's also the lane just runs it down. If you're laning, your jungler shows up and they just run right into the enemies. If you're the jungler, your laners get excited that you're there and they assume they can take a fight and they run directly into the enemy team. Part of navigating a jungle gank is all being on the same page and somehow your team is never prepared. Then comes the second rotation leading to the 8-minute mid birds. I really think that this is the part of the game where people have no idea what to do because this is when the game gets much less textbook. So junglers don't go back to jungle. They just hang out in lane. Even worse, they get KO'd and then go back to lane instead of their freshly baked jungle. Nobody goes mid. There isn't an exact rule for who should go mid, because if you're stacking, maybe you should try to stay in lane and get a few extra stacks, or if both laners head mid, then you and your lane partner can just score a bunch of points and the farm isn't even guaranteed, so it's harder to make the decision of who's actually supposed to go mid, but the decision that's made is usually just not to go mid at all, and then they yell at you. Next is where rotations start happening and teams have to figure out which lane they'll try to win an objective at the 7-minute mark, and for some reason, they just never come. In coordinated play, there's often one Mon who will stay off laning and the rest of the team will head to an objective, but we almost never see this in an average game. The team stays split, the entire team runs into a fight they can't win, one player rips an objective just to get it stolen, and I think this is really where intentional macro playing comes in and players just do not have it. They also have to start really paying attention to where their team and the enemy team are, and they just refuse to. Your Zeraora will go try to score Your Zeraora will try to go score 4 points into a bunch of enemies when they really could have easily come bottom with the rest of the team. And don't even get me started on objective prioritization. Well, actually get me started because that's the point of this video. Honestly, either objective can be great given the right situations. It's not as black and white as it was on the old map when you absolutely had to go first Dreadnought. So it's much harder for players to figure out what the best play is because it takes legitimate macro skill. Sometimes you break top early and want to put pressure on their tier 2 goal. Sometimes you want to prioritize bottom because of team-wide XP. Sometimes you just choose to trade objectives. It just depends. And your team will literally never have any idea what to do. Half the time they just wander around in an empty jungle, going wherever the rest of your team is not. After the first objective is where I would say the mid-game starts. There's a lot that players have to consider in the mid-game. When to farm, when to fight, when to push, when to score, when to head to objectives, and where. Sometimes the mid-game involves a lot of fighting, sometimes it doesn't, but you can count on your jungle jungler entering the late game at level 10 because they didn't farm or fight. The mid game is where we see a lot of macro decisions being made, and as I said before, the team does not know. And I can't provide a here's how you navigate mid game guide because Unite isn't actually a solved game. Things change game to game. But there is one certainty, and that's that your teammates don't know what to do either. I guess the things I can say is that you have to know where the farm timers, you have to be clearing farm on cooldown, and you have to know where everyone is on the map so that you can make plays. You also have to know your role and what plays you can make. Your support shouldn't be looking for backcaps while the team fights. Your defender shouldn't be the only one at an objective. Your attacker shouldn't be frontlining. And you can best believe you will see all of these mistakes in any given game. The late game starts when Rayquaza is on the map. Your team will farm during it, your team will backcap, your team will use their Unite move right before Ray spawns. They'll make the mistake of trying to defend a Lecky while Ray gets ripped. They'll be the one ripping Ray while the rest of the team is down. I could go on. Maybe I should, actually. They won't stay behind the front line. They'll try to flank even when you have no vision. They'll bush check. They'll poke Ray just to get stunned by it. They'll go down without using their ult. They'll blow their secure move. They'll try to secure with knock knock even though they have Spirit Shackle. They'll chase the backcapping Sableye, and they'll do it every single time. There's something to be said about the late game of Unite in itself because it's really difficult to make a 10-minute game where the final objective is super important but doesn't ultimately determine the outcome of the game, and unfortunately Ray does determine the outcome of many games. You can be winning all game and then your Cinderace decides to rip into a Blaziken and it happens. But in terms of the mind of the Unite player, none of these things really matter to them. They are not learning that they shouldn't make these decisions. They don't even process why they win or lose games. They just go into a game and do the exact same thing. They don't check KOs or damage numbers. They don't care about their level. They just know that Ray wins games, so they go for it. Or they know that scoring wins games, so they go score. Now let's get into why these things happen. Research suggests that people who play video games have a more advanced cognitive ability than people who don't play video games. Stay with me. This doesn't necessarily mean gamers are smarter, but they're able to make decisions with more confidence and more easily solve problems. They're also better at time management since many games have time-based restrictions. However, studies who specifically looked into MOBAs, which is what Unite is, have found that players who invest a lot of time into MOBAs are associated with improved attention and visual motor skills, but also a higher risk of losing control. So this means that players who invest a lot of time into multiplayer games like Unite are likely more susceptible to tilt and purposely or even unknowingly making bad decisions. I've talked about tilt in a previous video as well. Basically, being tilted causes a player to make suboptimal decisions, and it is known that there are no positive outcomes of tilt. I can say from experience, I've been there, where after multiple losses, I'm just no longer interested in filling for the team, and I'll just go ahead and play Delphox anyway. I would also like to add some other things. Firstly, there's evidence to suggest that it's extremely hard for gamers to stop a gaming session, so playing on tilt is actually more attractive to people than turning off the game. Pokemon Unite has added features to encourage this as well, such as grinding to your 1600 sticker, which they make very easy for players who simply play enough games or spend enough time on the game. It's also very common for gamers to experience negative psychological well-being. Gamers are more likely to experience addiction, boredom, loneliness, anxiety, and depression. Players tend to use games as an escape from reality, and simply not gaming may be enough to remind them of all those bad feelings. Something like feeling like they are good at a game may be something that's really important to them in combating their depression and unhealthy practice for sure, but in our case, they may put a lot of emphasis in convincing themselves they are good players. It's easier on your own mental health to blame everyone else rather than blame yourself for your mistakes. At the end of the day, nothing changes when you angrily blame your teammates for a loss, but a lot may change if you blame yourself. You can get down on yourself, depressed, upset, and it may change the way you interact with the world. What about Unite? Doesn't the game itself have anything to do with why the player base is so bad? Of course. The game is just not good enough at telling players how to play. For For example, rewarding good decisions, punishing bad decisions. Obviously, there are players who enjoy ruining other people's experience, but we have to assume the players are well-intended and simply naive, because if we assume they're all trolls who suck, then there's literally no improvement to be done. It's also supposed to be an easy game, and it definitely is the most inclusive MOBA. It's less toxic than other MOBAs and much simpler to get into. Again, you can get to master rank just by playing enough, and I think the developers want that. It's Pokemon, anyone should be able to enjoy it. If they add too much complication or punish players who aren't good, they could continue to lose more of a player base that people have estimated is already declining. Plus, as we talked about, the psyche of a gamer is fragile. Messing too much with the simplicity of the game could feed into the gamer's negative feelings like anxiety and depression. We get to see an interesting prioritization chosen by the developers even here, which I also talked about in a previous video, but they want to prioritize new players rather than existing players. They want new players to come to the game and like it, and they tend to leave us veteran players in the background, making matchmaking worse for us, subjecting us to the worst plays you can imagine, nerfing builds with high skill expression, and so on, under the assumption that we're deep enough into the sunk cost fallacy to continue on anyway. They're right, at least for me. This is why they continue to design really exciting releases that are also just broken and easy, because bad players can use them and has just as much success as someone with higher skill. And that being said, their most recent patch or producer note that came out about taking away EXs and trying to separate new players from veteran players is a really good start, and I hope that they continue to do that. Anyway, I think it's reasonable enough to conclude that nothing will change with your horrible teammates, but I think it's interesting to dive into their thought processes. Ultimately, it's about time I put the fries in the damn bag. As always, references are in the description. Let me know as well if there are any topics you want me to talk about next, and I will see you all next time. Bye!